You probably know Hanukkah as the warm glow of candles in a dark winter window, a family gathered around a small 9-branched lamp, while children spin a dreidel and sing familiar songs. But why an 8-night festival of lights? Where did it come from? And what do those candles actually commemorate? The untold story behind Hanukkah begins not in cozy living rooms, but on a dusty Judean hill, in a desecrated temple courtyard, and in the messy politics of a Hellenistic empire. In this video, we'll tell the story behind the lights, the revolt, the rededication of the temple, and how memory, ritual, and later tradition shaped the holiday we know today. Sources and suggested readings are linked in the description below. If you enjoy careful, long-form explorations of history and religious traditions, consider subscribing for more stories like this. To make sense of Hanukkah, we need a brief scaffold of the past. The Jewish story of sacred space and exile runs across centuries. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first temple in Jerusalem and carried many Judeans into exile. Decades later, when Persian rulers allowed exiles to return, the community in Judea rebuilt a new sanctuary, the Second Temple, and re-established the central rites of Israelite worship. For several centuries, the temple stood as the focal point of religious life, ritual, and civic identity in Jerusalem. That world changed dramatically when the Macedonian ruler Alexander the Great swept across the eastern Mediterranean in the late 4th century BCE. His conquests brought a new Hellenistic cultural order, Greek language, institutions like the gymnasium, new styles of art and public ritual, and a model of civic life anchored in Greek polis culture. Alexander's empire broke apart after his death. The region that included Judea came under the sway of the Seleucid dynasty, which ruled from Syria. Over generations, Hellenistic influences spread among many local elites in cities across the Near East, including some Jewish communities. Hellenization, the adoption of Greek language, customs, education, and civic institutions, affected Jewish society in complex ways. Some Jews welcomed elements of Hellenistic culture as avenues for learning, political advancement, or urban life. Others regarded these influences with suspicion or outright rejection, seeing them as alien to the Torah's teachings. The conflict was neither simple nor purely external. It divided communities internally, creating fault lines between pro-Hellenizing factions and traditionalists who sought to preserve distinctive Jewish ritual and law. The story that becomes Hanukkah turns on what happened during the reign of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a Seleucid king who ruled in the mid-2nd century BCE. Antiochus appears in ancient sources as a dramatic, controversial figure.
He is sometimes portrayed as a ruler trying to assert central control after military setbacks, other times as a king eager to stamp his authority through cultural homogenization. Scholars debate his precise motives, and ancient accounts present different emphases. Some highlight political and financial considerations, others stress cultural and religious policies. According to the historical narratives preserved in our primary sources, tensions escalated in Judea during Antiochus's reign. The sources describe acts that amounted to the looting and profanation of the temple in Jerusalem. These included the installation of foreign altars and the performance of sacrifices to Greek deities, plus legal measures that restricted or punished traditional Jewish practices, such as circumcision and Sabbath observance. Remember that the sources we rely on, notably 1 Maccabees, 2 Maccabees, and later Josephus, were written from particular points of view and at different times. They report events differently and interpret motives in ways that reflect their agendas. One central detail in the story is the role of Jewish collaborators and internal rivals. In Jerusalem, some members of the priestly leadership pursued Hellenizing reforms, whether out of conviction, political calculation, or as a bid for favor with the Seleucid court. Names that appear in ancient accounts, such as Jason and Menelaus, represent Jewish elites who adopted Hellenic ways and sometimes secured positions like the high priesthood through bribes or political maneuvering. Their presence underscored that the crisis was as much about Jewish identity and internal struggle as about foreign oppression. The spark that lights the revolt is dramatic and intimate. In the village of Modin, a priest named Mattathias confronted an imperial decree that demanded a pagan sacrifice. An official stood before him, urging compliance. A fellow Jew volunteered to do what the official asked. Mattathias refused. Sources tell us that he killed the Jew who agreed to perform the sacrifice and the royal officer as well, then fled to the hills with his sons. Whether the narrative's details are all precise, the image endures.
one priest's refusal became the seed of an armed uprising. From those hills, a resistance took shape. Mattathias and his band relied on irregular guerrilla tactics, leveraging local knowledge of terrain, surprise attacks, and the support of villagers who opposed forced Hellenization. After Mattathias's death, leadership passed to one of his sons, Judah Maccabee, Judah the Hammer, who emerges in the sources as the principal military commander. Under Judah's leadership, the rebel forces won a series of engagements against Seleucid troops and their local allies. The campaigns were not a single decisive pitched battle, so much as a sequence of ambushes, raids, and strategic maneuvers that eroded Seleucid control and allowed the insurgents to reclaim territory.
The campaign culminated in the recapture of Jerusalem and the urgent task of reestablishing proper worship in the temple. Ancient sources give vivid, ritual-rich detail about this phase. The rebels entered the sacred precincts, cleared debris, removed impure objects, repaired the altar, and restored the daily offerings, the tamid, the continuous twice-daily ritual that structured temple life. The act of rededication, the Hebrew word Hanukkah literally means dedication or rededication, was a public statement that the temple had been cleansed and returned to its proper use. This kind of source-based analysis, where history, ritual, and later tradition intersect, is what we focus on here. If that's valuable to you, subscribing helps you stay with the channel. Here is where the ritual memory begins to diverge from the earliest historical reportage. The contemporaneous narrative found in books like 1 Maccabees emphasizes the political and military achievement, a successful revolt that allowed the community to reclaim and cleanse its sanctuary. It describes sacrifices, public rejoicing, and the setting aside of the altar for proper worship. 2 Maccabees, in contrast, written from a different theological angle, frames events in part as divine retribution for communal apostasy and highlights miraculous elements, though its account is not identical to the later rabbinic tradition. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, retells and adapts these traditions for his Roman-era readers, adding details and interpretations that reflect his purposes. The famous story about the oil, that a single day's supply of ritually pure oil miraculously lasted 8 days, permitting time to prepare new consecrated oil, does not appear in the earliest narratives of the revolt. It emerges later in rabbinic literature, most famously in the Babylonian Talmud, which was compiled several centuries after the events it describes. The Talmud presents the oil narrative as the reason the festival lasts 8 days, linking the practical need to produce pure oil with a theological affirmation of divine favor. This story became central to liturgical practice and popular piety. The 8 nights of candle lighting in private homes, the special blessings, and the communal memory of a providential sign. It is important to distinguish here between types of sources and what they aim to do. 1 Maccabees, likely composed in the late 2nd century BCE, reads largely as a chronicle with a pro-Hasmonean orientation. It celebrates the leaders of the revolt and provides a relatively straightforward account of campaigns and events. 2 Maccabees, which covers some of the same period from a different perspective, is more overtly theological and concerned with moral lessons and divine judgment. Josephus, writing in the 1st century CE, offers an interpretive retelling that adapts the Maccabean story to contemporaneous concerns.
The Talmud, produced centuries later, reflects how Jewish liturgical life and rabbinic memory had assimilated and reshaped historical narratives into a living festival. Each witness serves a different function: history, theology, communal memory, or liturgical explanation. The oil miracle is best understood as a later devotional motif that helped structure practice. The earliest accounts center on military success and the rededication rite. That distinction has concrete implications for the festival's material form. In the Temple era, the central cult object was the 7-branched menorah, a fixture of the sanctuary's inner court and an icon of the priestly cult. The Hanukkah lamp that most people light today is a Hanukkah, a 9-branched candelabrum with 8 lights for the festival nights and an extra servant light, the shamash, used to kindle the others. The Hanukkah is a post-temple domestic ritual object. Its widespread use reflects the shift from an exclusively temple-centered worship to household-centered practice in the centuries after the Second Temple's destruction. Lighting candles at home, gradually increasing the number of lights, reciting blessings, singing hymns like Ma'oz P'sur,
and engaging in communal displays transformed a military victory and temple rededication into a multi-layered ritual of family, public memory, and spiritual symbolism. The holiday's liturgical elements also evolved in concrete ways. Rabbinic debates preserved in medieval and earlier sources revealed differences about the correct order of lighting, whether to begin with one candle and add a new light each night, or to light the full set and progressively extinguish. Customs vary too by region and communal tradition. Public menorah lightings in town squares became a modern innovation in some places. In others, the ritual remained primarily domestic. The dreidel game, the fried foods associated with oil, and special songs each represent layers of cultural accretion, some likely late medieval or early modern in origin, that joined the ancient kernel of the rededication memory. Returning to the revolt's aftermath, the political consequences were neither simple nor unambiguously victorious in the long run. The Maccabean family, the Hasmoneans, also called Asmoneans in some traditions, moved from insurgent leadership to dynastic rule. Over a century, they transformed from rebel leaders into monarchs and high priests, expanding their control at times and engaging in the same kinds of politics they had once opposed. Their independence was relatively short-lived in the sweep of history. Internal dynastic struggles, regional pressures, and the expansion of Roman power eventually subsumed Judea into the orbit of Rome. The Hasmonean legacy is therefore complex. The revolt secured a brief period of autonomy and the recovery of sacred space, but it also ushered in a new era of political consolidation and factionalism.
Historians and theologians have long debated what the revolt represents. Some older accounts cast it in straightforward terms as a struggle for religious freedom against foreign oppression. Later interpretations, particularly those coming from within Jewish theological frameworks, sometimes read the crisis as divinely ordained punishment for communal sins, an explanation reflected in 2 Maccabees. Contemporary scholars emphasize a plurality of causes: economic pressures on the Seleucid treasury that led to heavy taxation and corruption, Antiochus's desire to reassert control after military reverses, and ideological policies aimed at cultural standardization. The presence of Jewish Hellenizers complicates a narrative of simple external domination. The conflict had a fierce internal dimension. These historiographical complexities matter when we consider how modern readers remember Hanukkah. In many contemporary Western societies, Hanukkah has acquired a visibility that owes much to its calendaric proximity to Christmas. The modern social landscape, where both holidays appear in winter public spaces, commercial advertising, and family traditions, has encouraged a cultural association between the two. But theologically and historically, they are distinct. Hanukkah commemorates a rededication of the Jerusalem temple and a struggle over religious practice and identity in the Hellenistic world, while Christmas, in Christian theology, celebrates the nativity of Jesus and has entirely different theological roots. The overlap in timing is largely coincidental and arises from the interplay of the lunar-solar Jewish calendar with the Gregorian solar calendar widely used in the West. The modern prominence of Hanukkah in secular culture can also be read as a social adaptation, a way for Jewish communities to assert presence and celebrate identity during a season dominated by a minority culture. Throughout this narrative, it is important to keep in mind the sources that shape our understanding. 1 Maccabees, likely composed within a few decades after the events, gives a detailed chronicle of the revolt with a clear pro-Hasmonean bent. 2 Maccabees, derived from an earlier Hebrew or Aramaic source now lost, focuses on theological lessons and portrays events as manifesting divine judgment and deliverance. Josephus, writing in the 1st century CE for a Greco-Roman audience, retells the story with his own interpretive aims. The Babylonian Talmud, compiled several centuries later, reflects the religious concerns and liturgical memory of Rabbinic Judaism and gives us the oil tale that became central to later observance. Modern historians read these texts critically, weighing internal contradictions, authorial intent, and the archaeological record to assemble probable sequences and plausible motives. Archaeology offers additional texture, but rarely provides tidy confirmation of narrative details.
Excavations in and around Jerusalem, material remains of Hellenistic influence, and coins and inscriptions reveal a landscape of cultural exchange, economic pressures, and political control. They help corroborate that Hellenistic institutions, like gymnasia, existed in Judea, and that Greek cultural markers penetrated social life, evidence that supports textual claims about the cultural tensions of the period. Yet archaeological data often speak in fragments. They supplement texts rather than replace the need for careful reading of ancient accounts. What did Hanukkah mean to the people who experienced it, and what did it come to mean afterwards? For the immediate participants, the rededication ceremony was both a political act and a religious restoration, reclaiming sacred space, re-establishing ritual order, and signaling collective sovereignty, at least symbolically, over a community's religious life. Over time, as temple ritual lost its central practical place, especially after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, Hanukkah's observance migrated into domestic and communal realms. Lighting candles in the home, reciting blessings, singing hymns, and playing in the community became ways to keep alive the memory of rededication, to celebrate resilience, and to mark continuity of identity. The holiday's central symbols reflect this layered meaning: light as a metaphor for continuity and hope, the Hanukkah as a portable, domestic echo of the temple's menorah, oil as a symbol of ritual purity, and in rabbinic memory, as a sign of divine favor. Customs such as the playing of the dreidel later entered the cultural mix. The toy's four-sided letters have often been associated with phrases about publicizing the miracle or surviving oppression, though their exact historical origins are debated and may blend medieval folktale and local practice. There are subtler lessons in the Hanukkah story for how communities remember the past. Memory is not a simple mirror to past events. It is shaped by theological needs, liturgical creativity, and social context. A narrative that highlights military triumph might serve dynastic or national self-understanding. A story that emphasizes divine providence might serve didactic or devotional aims. Over centuries, communities select, emphasize, and rework episodes from the past to serve present needs. The oil story's prominence in rabbinic popular memory shows how a later theological motif can become the defining public image of an earlier historical event. This is part of what makes Hanukkah a compelling case study for historians of religion. It is a moment where temple ritual, armed resistance, cultural conflict, and later liturgical creativity intersect. The festival commemorates a moment when a community reclaimed its sanctuary. It also remembers, through evolving ritual, a broader struggle for identity under cultural pressure.
The story is not merely about light. It is about how people find ways to reassert collective values and religious practice under duress, and how they transform political acts into enduring symbols. There are, of course, debates and unresolved questions that historians continue to explore. How centralized was Antiochus's policy toward Judea? Did his decrees aim specifically at Jews or at broader civic control measures? To what extent did economic need, war indemnities, plunder, or administrative corruption drive Seleucid actions more than cultural motives? How did local alliances and rivalries among Jewish elites shape the course of events? Modern scholarship tends to prefer a multi-causal explanation that recognizes political, economic, and cultural factors alongside religious friction. The variety of ancient sources offers competing emphases rather than a single, uncontested story, and that plurality is part of the untold quality we want to highlight. If you want to read these sources for yourself, start with 1st Maccabees and 2nd Maccabees for contemporaneous narrative layers, Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews for a 1st century retelling, and the Babylonian Talmud for the rabbinic framing that gives us the oil story. Modern introductions and scholarly works on Hellenistic Judea provide useful critical frameworks. Look for concise histories and studies on Hellenization, the Hasmonean dynasty, and Jewish ritual transformations. Links to recommended translations and scholarly guides are in the description. As we draw to a close, what does Hanukkah teach us that is relevant now? It reminds us that religious practices carry histories that are often more complicated than their popular images suggest. An 8-night ritual that today often centers on family lightings has at its origin the rededication of a contested sacred space after armed resistance, a moment shaped by both internal division and external pressure. Its modern observance weaves together military memory, ritual continuity, and devotional innovation. The festival's endurance testifies to the power of communal memory to transform political struggle into religious ritual and to adapt that ritual across centuries and changing circumstances.
If this history deepened your understanding of Hanukkah, subscribe to the channel. We publish new historical stories and text-based deep dives every day. Hanukkah is not equivalent in liturgical weight to biblical pilgrimage festivals like Passover or Yom Kippur. Its modern prominence in some societies results in part from calendaric coincidence and social visibility. Yet its significance lies in how a community remembered and ritualized a crisis that touched the heart of religious life. The lights in our windows are a living shorthand for that layered past: dedication and rededication, resistance and ritual, history and memory.
If this history piqued your curiosity, check the description for links to primary texts and recommended readings to explore further. If you'd like more deep dives into texts like 1 and 2 Maccabees, Josephus, or the Talmud, or if you want a visual timeline and annotated map to follow the campaigns, subscribe and look for the next episode where we unpack these primary sources in more detail.